Thank you very much. I can't tell you what a privilege it really is for me to tell you a little bit about the recipient of the Ashbrook Award and also be able to introduce him tonight to you, Ed Rollins, who will be receiving that honor this evening. You know, John Ashbrook was a trailblazer. He's someone that inspired me to get involved in politics. And I'm so blessed that I actually knew him and can say that this is somebody that I was mentored by, that inspired me. And so I take very seriously the giving of this award tonight, and I know that the recipient is more than worthy because he's also my friend. But John Ashbrook, who was a trailblazer, was a courageous conservative who knew what he believed. He fought for those beliefs. And he never, ever gave up. John was a leader of ethics, integrity, and principle. He believed that politics must be based on a strong foundation, a firm philosophy, and noble objectives. John Ashbrook devoted his entire life to protecting America's unique history, its heritage, its traditions, and its values. He was a rock. The Ashbrook Award is given to leaders who believe in the hope and promise of America and actually do something about it. It is given to citizens who strengthen civil society so we leave a legacy of freedom for future generations. I want you to know that some of the past recipients have been Ronald Reagan, Ed Meese, M. Stanton Evans, William Rusher, Jeannie Kirkpatrick, Bill Batchelder, and Jesse Helms. Tonight's recipient is personally a very good friend, and he is an American patriot. Ed Rollins has given me actually some of the best political advice I've ever received. But he also took the time to counsel me, encourage me, and fortify me in difficult times. He, like John Ashbrook, is a rock. Ed Rollins was born in Boston, moved to California, grew up in a housing project. He fought as a boxer from ages 13 to 23, winning all kinds of titles across the West Coast. In fact, he won 164 fights. And you know, he only lost 2. Now let me just tell you something. Let me tell you what the message is there. Don't mess with this guy. Ed Rollins is a part of history. He made history as Ronald Reagan's campaign manager in 1984, orchestrating Reagan's historic landslide win of 49 states. Ed Rollins' accomplishments are epic. He served 4 United States presidents. He served 2 times as assistant to the president. He was in charge of the White House Office of Political Affairs. He directed congressional relations at 2 cabinet agencies, served as chief of staff for the Republicans in the California State Assembly, and then headed the National Republican Congressional Committee. Ed Rollins has advised cabinet members, U.S. senators, governors, members of Congress, and corporate leaders across this nation. You can also catch Ed Rollins on Fox News, where he's an analyst. But more significantly, I suggest you read his book, Bare Knuckles and Back Rooms. He might sell you one tonight and sign it. And it became a national bestseller. Ed Rollins has mentored countless conservatives. I'm fortunate to consider myself one of them. And he's done his part to make America a better place. That is a legacy. Ed takes the time to care, and that's a rare thing. His devotion to our nation is unmatched. His dedication to liberty is unrivaled. Ed Rollins is truly one of a kind. And I know that this award is a perfect fit and that John Ashbrook would be proud that Ed Rollins has been entrusted with this award tonight. A quote from football coach Dutch Meyer seems to fit Ed Rollins' commitment to winning. Fight him until hell freezes over, then fight him on the ice. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the winner of this award and our speaker tonight, my good friend, Ed Rollins.
Rex, you are my friend, and I want to thank you for reminding me of those 2 losses. The 164 wins is a blur, but I remember those losses. It's like after we lost Minnesota in 1984, and the next morning, Reagan said to me, "Well, what happened in Minnesota?" And I said, "Mr. President, we have to put nuclear waste somewhere. They got a lot of lakes up there." And the truth of the matter is, we would have won Minnesota, but Ronald Reagan, being the gentleman that he is, did not want to compete at Walter Mondale's home state. He thought he deserved to at least have a free reign in his home state. And obviously, we lost by 1,612 votes. I'm not bitter. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here. I came to the first dedication here with Ronald Reagan, and I was the White House political director at the time. And this event had been turned down by Mike Deaver and Jim Baker, who sort of called this right-wingers heaven. And needless to say, they didn't quite share all the philosophy that a lot of us in this room did. And Congressman Ashbrook had been such a great American. And obviously the people that were supportive of this program kept bombarding the White House, and I kept fighting hard and hard, and we finally got it on the schedule. And so it was in May of 1983, so I came here for the dedication. And because it was my event, I was going to get to ride on Marine One. Marine One, I had a seat all the time on Air Force One, but Marine One is the presidential helicopter. It holds about 9 people, and 6 of them are Secret Service guys, so they obviously have to go. The press secretary has to go. I don't know why, but he does. Chief of staff feels he has to go. And I had a seat, and the doctor has to go. So whatever's left is like one extra seat for the senior staff. So today it was my turn to go. So I'm standing out there waiting for the helicopter to come down, waiting for the president to come out. And Jim Baker comes out and he said, "Rollins, I know this is your event." He said, "We got a little problem here." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "The First Lady's running a little bit late." I said, "Well, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it." He said, "No, she's running a little bit late, and her hairdresser just got your seat on Marine One." So the complexity of getting from the South Lawn of the White House to Andrews Air Force Base is about a 45-minute car drive. It's about a 2-minute helicopter ride. So I go sprinting through the White House. I'm 40 years old, overweight, sweating like a plow horse, yelling, screaming, "Get me a car, get me a car." So to make a long story short, with sirens and the whole bit, we made it about half hour late for the president. Of course, I get on the plane, and Baker goes, "How many times do I have to tell you don't be late for the president?" And Mrs. Reagan, of course, gives me this hate stare. So we arrived for this extraordinary event, and it was a right-winger's dream because it was everybody who had ever been in the conservative movement was here for this extraordinary event. So Julius, the hairdresser, who's a lovely, lovely man, Baker says to Julius, "You're in right-wingers heaven here. And they don't quite understand you Hollywood hairdressers. So my suggestion is you grab a hold of Ed Rollins' belt and you stay with him all day long." So Julius and I traveled the campus and met all the right-wingers. And I was single in those days, so a lot of rumors got started. It was an extraordinary event, and it meant a great deal to the president, and I'm so honored to be here. This extraordinary group of people that you've honored in the past, starting with Ronald Reagan, it makes me very humble to be a part of that list. Equally as important, I'm glad it's 30 years since Ronald Reagan received this award. following Ronald Reagan is not an easy task. I had the misfortune of doing that a few times when I was in the White House. I always was convinced it was Jim Baker. I was the conservative Jim Baker's revenge. Why does anybody ever have to follow Ronald Reagan at a speaking event? It's not bad enough to do that when the president has a room full of people like this, but when you stand up to begin your speech, the Secret Service comes up and they take the seal of the president, which is hammered on, they displace it, all the press shut their cameras down, and when that's all going on, all the people leave except my mother and her 4 friends would come to see me. So I'm glad there's a little distance between the president. With the passing of Mrs. Reagan a few weeks ago, I just want to spend the night talking a little bit about the Reagans. I know you all know a great deal about it, but I had the privilege of being around them for a long period of time. I became a Republican because of Ronald Reagan. I was the epitome of the Reagan Democrat. My father was a shipyard worker, a labor leader. We didn't know any Republicans, although I'm convinced a couple of the nuns that whacked me around a little bit in the St. Vincent Ferris School were Republicans. But I admired Ronald Reagan so much that I basically ended up working for him. He was the chairman for Nixon's campaign in 1972, and I had the privilege of serving him in the White House. And everybody always says to me, what was Ronald Reagan really like? And I said he was exactly what he appeared to be. He was a lovely, lovely, gentle man who had a core of convictions unlike anybody I'd ever met. And it was a conviction that he had developed over a long period of time. He'd grown up in the FDR period. He'd grown up poor. He basically grew up in a small community. He went to Eureka College. I had the privilege of going back and doing his birthday dinner, the 105th birthday dinner. And Eureka's was about 200 kids when he went there in Eureka, Illinois. And the interesting thing is Ronald Reagan had moved 14 times before he went to Eureka College. His father was, as he described to me, an alcoholic shoe salesman, couldn't hold a job. So obviously this extraordinary man had moved on. When the rent was due, they moved. And so he found a place, Eureka College, like many of your young scholars here found a place that really changed his life. And the great honor for me was they took me to the stage where he had made his first speech ever. There was a small little room, isn't as big as this stage itself, and the stage is about the size of a table. And this is where he made his first speech, and he realized the power of persuading people with his voice. And someone asked me earlier today, what was Ronald Reagan really about? And Ronald Reagan was a man who had a deep core of convictions. And he saw the presidency not as something for him. He saw it as an ability to go to the American public and convince them of the dangers facing this country, and equally as important as the solutions. I have an echo. I have a double speaker on here, so can you hear the echo? Oh, that's good. All right. If I find I won't stop. So Reagan developed his philosophy, and as we sit here watching probably the most chaotic campaign, I've been in a lot of campaigns. I started with Lincoln in 1860. And the only one I remember quite like this was 1912, when Teddy Roosevelt decided he was going to take out his hand-picked successor, William Howard Taft, and create another party. And hopefully we're not going to create another party out of this mess. But I think what we need to do is everyone sort of grabs at Reagan and wants to grab the mantle and run with it. They need to remember that Ronald Reagan never spoke ill of another Republican, and seldom ever spoke ill of a Democrat, and certainly never by name. And my good friend Bob McCune, who served in the Congress when he was there, Reagan was always kind to Democrats. This love affair that they talk about, him and Tip O'Neill, was not a love affair. It was a negotiating term. Reagan persuaded the country that he had good ideas, good concepts, and they were simple. Not simple to get accomplished, but he came in at a time in the post-Vietnam War with ships that couldn't sail, planes that couldn't fly. Half the Navy, when we tested them, were on drugs. We basically had an Air Force that was depreciated, wasn't safe, and the Soviets were on the move. I have to chuckle. I have a 21-year-old daughter who's basically going to be a senior next year at Mount Holyoke, but this year she's spending a year in Ireland studying at Trinity College. I tell her she can date the little Jewish boys in Amherst, but she's not going to get to date an Irish boy without me checking them out thoroughly. So she's traveling in Europe, and she called me this weekend. She was in Berlin, and they'd gone to the Holocaust Museum, which is very touching. If any of you have been there, it's very, very touching. And she said, Dad, I was traveling with a bunch of girls from UC Berkeley. She said, you know, I always thought Berkeley was this elite school. And one of them turned and said, and this is to the point of the Ashcroft Center here, I didn't know the Soviets were in the war. What side were they on? These are kids at UC Berkeley, one of the best schools in the country. And I said, did you explain it to him? She said, oh, I did, Dad. I explained it to him. She said, but there are three of them, and none of them knew. And I said, Lily, the problem today is we don't teach history. We don't teach our culture. And I think this is what this thing is all about. So I teach at a school called Hofstra. I teach a course in the American presidency. And I'm a presidential fellow. And my counter fellow is a gentleman by the name of Howard Dean. Some of you may remember him from the great. So obviously Howard and I become very dear friends, but we differ slightly on political philosophy. And Howard, like Donald Trump, does not have a filter. So I sit there and I say, Howard, do you really want to say that? And he goes, what did I say? And when I tell him, I said, you're not on Morning Joe. You teach a bunch of young kids here, you know. Figure it out. But what Reagan did is Reagan basically came into office and he had 4 goals. And he lived, any one of these would be monumental. He said, we're going to rebuild the defenses of the country. Not to go to war with the Soviets, but to make sure the Soviets don't go to war with us. And he did. He created a great pride. He built a great military. He spent an enormous sum of money. In the last 30 years and all the activity that we've been in, those have been the resources that we've built, a prideful military. Last week I was at you talked earlier about the Marine who tragically passed away. It was one of your students. This is called the Leatherneck Ball. And in Manhattan every year, this is the 53rd year, about 1,000 corporate types come together with the Marines from Washington, D.C., the Commandant, the Marine Band, the whole bit, and they have a scholarship fund. And I was sitting at a young captain, or young colonel's table. He literally had just come back from Iraq the night before, from his 7th tour of duty. He had this beautiful young wife and young son, and they were like honeymoons. I mean, obviously she hadn't seen him in 7 months. In the course of the conversation, I said, what's it like? He said, we're sent there to train them, but they won't fight. They won't fight. And I said, well, what? And he said, and we can't fight. And he said, that's the frustration. He said, I don't mind going there. I don't mind leaving my family. I don't mind putting ourselves in harm's way. But we don't have a leadership. We have a great military leadership, but we don't have a civilian leadership that lets us do the job. And why put us there? And why have us train people that aren't going to fight? And why put us there and put ourselves in jeopardy? So I thought that night, and I walked away and I said, that's really the test of what this next election is about. And obviously, it's an election unlike if I'd have sat here a year ago and said we're going to have Bernie Sanders chasing Hillary, one socialist in Congress is going to be chasing Hillary Clinton down, and have all the young people in the Democratic Party want to be socialist and want to be adhere to getting everything for free, and Bernie's going to be the significant. And our side, we're going to have this guy named Donald Trump, who used to do a celebrity TV show, who's going to be the front runner and about to be the nominee of our party. You'd never invited me back. You'd laughed me off the stage. And as I've said on Fox, I've been doing this for 50 years. I'm totally handicapped by my knowledge because it's totally irrelevant to this cycle. But Ronald Reagan rebuilt the defenses of the country, made Americans very proud. Equally as important, he lowered the tax rates. When he came into office, tax rates were 70% for anybody making $200,000 a year. He brought them down over course, reduced everyone's tax in the first 2 years, basically brought them down to 28%, got the economy booming again. The one thing he wasn't able to do as effectively as he wanted to, he wanted to shrink government. He wanted to basically get government off the backs of small business in particular. We made some progress there, but he basically restored the dignity to the country. We had 4 presidencies that had been measured as failures for some reason or other. John Kennedy was obviously tragically killed. Lyndon Johnson was driven from office. Richard Nixon was driven from office. Gerald Ford was driven from office. Jimmy Carter was driven from office. And people didn't think the presidency could work again. And people used to always say to me, well, how is Reagan going to be measured in the future? And I said, depends on who comes after him. If he's done an extraordinary job, he's made Americans believe in themselves again. He's created a great pride in this country. He's made Americans feel good about themselves. But equally as important, he's created an extraordinary role in Europe and other parts of the world. The one thing we don't understand, many Americans don't understand, We don't need to conquer anybody. We are the beacon to the world. We are our system of government, and the genius of the forefathers that drew this Constitution, as complicated as it is sometimes and as difficult as it is to work sometimes, it is absolutely the beacon of democracy. And so many others copy it, evolve from it, and what have you. And a strong American is a very critical period in this world, in a very unsafe world. And we basically have to restore that. We have to feel good about it ourselves, and we should feel good about it ourselves, because it's still the greatest place in the world. We aren't going to build a fence to keep people in. I hope we're not going to build a fence to keep people out. And I say that with and I know it's a touchy line, and I know it's a great buzz line, and Donald Trump has used it very effectively. But we are a nation that has been built on immigrants. I'm still amazed every time I get in a cab, I get into some place, and some Chinese cab driver, Uber driver, what have you, said, you know, I do this 16 hours a day. I got 4 daughters at NYU. They're going to graduate this year. I came to this country. I worked. I made $300 a month. Lived in a Chinese restaurant. I now have my own limousine. I have my own Uber, what have you. That's what the backbone of this country is. And we need to welcome people. We need to have our borders secure, and certainly in this time of terrorism, what have you. But we still have to have the welcome sign up. We still have to basically bring people here. And as a party, and I know some of you are not Republicans here, but as a party, we need to be a party of addition. And when you look at the demographics of the future, we're going to be a nation of Hispanic voters, Asian voters, young voters, women voters, and we can't insult them, we can't force them, we can't tell them to go away. Because if we do, we're going to have a very small, minute group, and we won't be viable. This is a very critical state, as you all know. You don't win the presidency without Ohio. It's always been valuable. That's why we've always looked to you for resources and great people. But I think the key thing here is Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, and obviously Ronald Reagan would not have been president without her guidance and support. And it wasn't that she messed around in policy. She didn't care about policy. She cared about him being taken care of, as any wonderful wife or spouse does. And she did. And she basically always tried to protect him, tried to inspire him. And as he told me on many occasions, he said, you know, I would not have run, I would not have stayed here if it wasn't for Nancy Reagan. Reagan had a great sense of humor. There's so many stories that I could tell, but I'm just going to kind of close here with a couple. We were going to New York, and there used to be a TV show called Kojak. Many you young people don't remember what it was, but it was Telly Savalas. It was the #1 show on television. So we're going up to New York City to visit Manhattan South, which is a police station on 48th Street. And the city, this is before Rudy Giuliani cleaned it up, the city was a mess at that point in time. And we're in the car, in the limousine. We'd taken Air Force One up to Newark, and we'd helicopter across. And all of a sudden, there's 1 million people on the street in Manhattan on 43rd Avenue going across the city. So I turned to the president, I said, doesn't this ever get to you? I mean, and he said, it doesn't get to me at all. And I said, but how can it not? How can you not be overwhelmed by all this adulation? He said, oh, Ed, he said, someone up here will be giving me an obscene sign pretty soon, and someone will have something on a stick, you know, accusing me of something. It kind of always brings you back to reality. And as I sat there watching him, I realized this was a very secure man who'd had adulation his entire life. He didn't need the adulation that many politicians get. He got his adulation when he was a lifeguard saving kids in the river at Eureka College. He obviously had great success as a movie star, what have you. And he had, the most important thing he had this extraordinary love for this country. He got up every single day and absolutely loved and admired this country. I remember coming back from a trip that we'd been on, and he was tired. He was very tired. You know, people forget his entire presidency, he was in his 70s. He was shot very near death, 60 days in the administration. People don't realize he bled out, and they rushed him back to the White House. It was a very critical time for us. And the bravery of him getting back up, going to the Congress, making a magnificent speech within a month, and basically getting his legislation passed, it was the backbone. But like anybody has surgery, anybody obviously gets shot, there's a recovery period, and he didn't quite get the recovery period. So he was really struggling, but he never lost his will. And I can tell you, when he asked me in 1983 to go run his campaign, I said to him, you sure you want to go? He said, no, Ed, I haven't made up my mind to go, but I want someone to be down there in case I do want to go. And I said, well, it's very reassuring. I'm giving my big office, my car, my driver, to go down and build some campaign that you might not run. And he said, well, He said, the good news, Ed, I'll know if we do run, there's someone good down there to take care of me. So the day I left the White House, October 17th, 1983, I walk into my farewell meeting. I said, can you kind of give me a little more reassurance than you gave me when you asked me to go do this? And he said, well, Ed, I'm getting closer, but I'm not there yet. So I go out and I say to Joe Rogers, my finance chairman, I said, Joe, let's light it up. Let's go raise the money. Let's get ready. And finally, in January, he decided to go and had a magnificent campaign. People forget that he was early on in '83. He was behind. When he actually asked me in March if I'd run his campaign, I came back and Lee Atwater was my deputy. And Lee Atwater was very excited. Lee Atwater, who never liked the White House, always was a campaign warrior, and didn't like meetings and all the kinds of stuff you do in the White House. He said, this is great. This is great. I said, Lee, the president's at 36% approval rating. John Glenn is ahead of him. Walter Mondale's ahead of him. Gary Hart hadn't even gotten the race yet. What if we basically take an incumbent president and get destroyed? He said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll fix it. We'll fix it. Well, in the course of that campaign, Ronald Reagan fell in love again with his country again. He campaigned like a young man. He traveled. We had this great road trip through Ohio. We had Truman's train. We came right through the heart of Ohio. And we had your famous governor who basically couldn't give a speech that wasn't shorter than an hour. And he said before we even got to Jobs. So the trip was about 2 hours longer than it was supposed to be. But the end of the day, it was a magnificent treat and restored him. And I think it was the epitome of what the world was about. I'm not going to do a Trump on you here. I'm not going to just wing it. But there's a couple things I think that sort of reflect Reagan. A couple passages I want to sort of close with here today. One is from his inaugural address, and these words are very, very interesting. We shall reflect the compassion that is so much a part of your makeup. How can we love a country and not love our countrymen? And loving them, reach out a hand when they fall, heal them when they're sick, and provide opportunities to make them self-sufficient so they will be equal in fact and not just in theory. You think about those words to a man that was basically talked about being mean, being someone who didn't care about the poor, the disadvantaged. He was a man who'd been poor. He'd probably been the poorest president ever at the start of his administration. He was a man who worked in the unions. He was a man who understood his countrymen. On the final night of the campaign in 1984, we were in San Diego, and these are the words that he read that I so totally reflect to. The greatness of America doesn't begin in Washington. It begins with each of you in the mighty spirit of free people under God, in the bedrock values you live by each day in your families, neighborhoods, and workplaces. Each of you is an individual, worthy of respect, unique and important to the success of America. And only by trusting you, giving you the opportunities to climb high and reach for the stars, can we preserve the golden dream of America as the champion of peace and freedom among the nations of the world. And the last times we heard from him was at the convention. Reagan never cared about his place in history. I said to him one time, we're coming back very, very tired. We had a very aggressive campaign day, and he was tired. And he stood up and in the helicopter coming across the South Lawn, and he stood up and he had pictures of his ranch, and he got up and he sort of tapped on the pictures and said, oh, I wish we were going in there to basically go to the ranch. I don't want to go back into work. Not knowing what to tell the leader of the free world, he didn't want to go back to work. I said, oh, Mr. President, I said, don't worry, history will be very kind to you. And he just turned to me very serious. He said, Ed, he said, I don't care about history. He said, they're going to distort it anyways. I'll be dead and gone when they write it. He said, at the end of the day, what I care about is, he said, we saw these young people out across this country today. And he said, young people to me that have come to appreciate what we're trying to do here. You know, I started my gubernatorial career standing up to the kids burning down Berkeley and what have you. So to see these young people come back, be enthused about America, to turn out to vote, to want to feel good about themselves again, gives me great hope. He said, look at this helicopter. He said, my father was an alcoholic shoe salesman. Every night, my brother and I had to go down to the bar and bring him home at 1 o'clock in the morning. And he said, I was proud to do it because I loved my father. My mother was disappointed, but we were proud of my father because he had a hard life. He said, Paul Laxalt was my best friend, who was a senator from Nevada. He said, Paul's father was a Basque immigrant sheep herder, came to this country with nothing, and basically for years worked in the hills shepherding sheep. He said, your father was a shipyard worker, and here we are. This is what this great country's about. That's what I care about. It's not my history, it's not my legacy. The last Republican convention that he spoke at, 1992, He said, whatever history may say about me when I'm gone, I hope it record that I appeal to your best hopes, not your worst fears, to your confidence rather than to your doubts. America was blessed to have had him and to have Nancy. I'm not sure we're going to have another one in our lifetime, but I hope for you young people out there, for these extraordinary young scholars you have here that you're paying for, that you study the history of this country and you realize the great men, the great women who basically made it what it is. And the baton is going to be passed to you. And as I look through this list of the 30 people who received this award before, I know absolutely almost every one of them. They were great men and women who went out and basically paid very heavy prices. If you're a conservative, a thinker, a member of Congress, run for president, you sometimes pay a very heavy price. It's not glamour, it's not West Wing, it's not scandal. It's a very, very tough environment to get into. As your governor will find when he returns to the state, he'll have been diminished a little bit by the process. I've watched many, and I think he's a great governor. I think he's a longtime friend of mine. It's just you get battered and bruised, and all of a sudden you get rejected by people across the country, and your own folk don't think quite the same way about you. I hope that's not true, but I'm sure it will be. So at the end of the day, we have to be grateful to those that are willing to serve. We have to be grateful that everything comes together in this election cycle. Democracy is a strange entity. And as I say to people, I get asked on every Fox show, will you support Donald Trump if he's the nominee? I said I started this game as a Republican 50 years ago, and I'll vote for the Republican. If Donald Trump's the Republican, I'll vote for Donald Trump. Now, I've had a lot of other choices to make along the way, but at the end of the day, if he wins this thing fair and square, that's what democracy is about. And hopefully my prayers and all the good works we can do will help him be a good candidate and maybe even a good president. But I think at the end of the day, Americans are very frustrated by the political process today. They don't think it works for them. And Trump has tapped into that, as has Bernie Sanders. And I think to a certain extent, we have to respect that. If people are willing to go out and campaign aggressively, and if people are willing to go out and stand in line to see candidates, that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. And that's what makes democracy great. Thank you so very much for this honor, I appreciate it.